You're listening to the Product Coalition podcast with Jay Stansel. This is where product mastery happens. This is where careers are made. Welcome to the Product Coalition podcast. Let's go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Product Coalition podcast. Joining us today is Nicole Segerer, the powerhouse General Manager at Revenera, which is a division of Flexera where she leads a global team responsible for over $100 million in sales. Now, Nicole's journey through product marketing, strategic leadership, and transformative growth has spanned more than a decade across both Revenera and Flexera. Nicole's a seasoned expert in software monetization, usage intelligence, and modern business models. And today, we're going to be chatting through some insights that Nicole's going to share that will genuinely unlock new revenue potential. Today's conversation centers on how data, AI, and APIs are going to be reshaping software monetization. Now, companies can evolve their pricing, their distribution, and their innovation strategies in this new era. From SaaS transitions to leveraging real-time data usage intelligence, Nicole is here to help us all think smarter, move faster, and grow that revenue with some purpose. So whether you're a product leader, a revenue strategist, or just curious about the future of software business models, buckle up. This is going to be a value-packed session. Nicole, welcome. I'm really excited to jump into this conversation with you today.
Jay, thanks a lot for inviting me. Excited to be here. And thanks for everyone who's joining us.
Absolute pleasure. Nicole, today's theme is all about monetization. Monetize this. This is obviously, a niche within the industry, albeit probably one of the most important niches within the industry of all of the challenges product people and business leaders face is monetization, pricing, distribution. What is it, before we get into all of that drives your passion for this specific segment of the industry around monetization?
Good question, Jay. Thanks for asking. I have grown into this segment of the industry about 10 to 14 years ago when I started working at Flexera and beyond, even before a little bit. What drove me is that, as you say, it is a niche. Some people never think about it, but it is the most important thing that a software company has to get right. What I found interesting in joining Revenera at the time we weren't called this way is that we had such a wonderful way of helping software companies impact how they drive their business, not only on a new bookings perspective, but also on renewals, etc. So I think it's one of the most underrated topics. I get super excited about it. After more than 10 years, I still do. Because it has a real impact. And when you think about career and what you're doing with your professional life, I find it absolutely exciting to have the opportunity to work in an area of business that can really impact the top line. Not all software products can do that. We have an opportunity to do so. And also what keeps my day-to-day job so interesting is I get to talk to hundreds of software companies, talking to them about how they monetize, what their challenges are, what data they do or don't have in order to get their business models right. And I just find this extremely interesting. Software monetization always comes in waves. We'll talk about that later. There's always changes in the industry that then trigger new models. And I just find it super exciting to watch these things and to try and do our best to help as companies adapt to those waves.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate for many of the audience, yield profitability is being squeezed around the world. The last 5 years post-COVID has taken us on a new path when it comes to monetization and growing top line. And obviously with technologies like AI now becoming the common core center of everything we're thinking and doing, I'm really getting excited to go into this. So to get us going, Nicole, where are the major trends right now when it comes to new software monetization approaches?
Yeah, thanks. Great question, Jay. The major trends are, you just highlighted one. When we think a few years back, let's take a 1 second or 10-second history lesson. When we think 5-10 years back, there was a time when profitability was not valued very highly. There was a time when it was possible to burn money for growth. That time doesn't exist anymore. Profitability is super important. At the same time, we get that other trend coming in. And that is a combination of SaaS and AI, I would say. A lot of software companies have already moved to SaaS. It's a smaller percentage that actually is able to run SaaS in a profitable way. And now you get an acceleration of that trend with AI coming in. Why is AI an acceleration of the trend? It is because AI isn't cheap. AI comes with a lot of cost. When you think about data, compute, building new solutions, building agents, et cetera, putting actually more pressure on that on bottom line and profitability. So that is what companies are facing right now. So they are having the challenge of making their SaaS solutions really profitable and of picking the right innovation in AI and then making sure that this actually works out when you look at a product line or a company P&L. And that's easier said than done. It's a big challenge for a lot of companies to work on. But it is the current trend that is impacting everyone. You also see that internally, when you look at how product management teams actually tracks their P&L, companies are getting way smarter. So now you have FinOps teams coming in saying, okay, here's your cloud spend, here's your AI spend. By the way, you're using those 10 SaaS tools to help with your cloud and AI, very often, by the way, way more than 10, to help with your cloud and AI strategy. All of that cost needs to be gets broken down to a product level and more recently even down to a customer level. And that is where that question of profitability comes in. So if I don't have a good strategy there as a product leader, then I might be up for a very uncomfortable situation with leadership about, okay, well, you have the growth, it's wonderful, but you're burning money each and every month. That doesn't work. Product leaders, I think, are well advised to start looking at that data and to start thinking about what they can do about it to make sure that they not only innovate, but they also do so in a profitable way.
Okay, staying in this thing, I want to go to best practices, but to be honest, Nicole, I'm a big anti-patterns guy. So as product leaders, revenue leaders are taking those thoughts in that direction, what are some common misconceptions or principles that you think need to be unlearned before going into that step?
Great question. Generally speaking, and that's not just monetization, I think that's actually a broader product management principle. People need to unlearn to just build features and capabilities for the sake of it. It doesn't work, especially when you think about AI use cases. And we've got real data on that, right? We know that just did a research, we do monetization monitors. It's a research that Revenera does with customers and prospects. So we always ask, well, what are you doing and how is it working from a monetization perspective? 80% of companies will have launched some sort of AI functionality, Gen AI, agentic AI, whatever. But when you really go deeper and you look at, okay, are customers using this? And is it something that carries some value that people would actually pay for? That creates a whole different picture. So I think product leaders need to unlearn to just build capabilities to be the first and to be the cool one, but to really and they should really think about what provides value to my customers. Potentially grab a handful of customers or just 2 and 3 and say, okay, would you be able to come along, give me some feedback and advice as I do that, so that when I build it and I launch it and I monetize it, I've got some promise that at least a subset of my customers would be willing to pay for it.
No, what you're talking about here is something that sort of concerns me around the craft of product management. It does feel, as we're stepping into this, particularly this vibe coding era of building software fast again and focusing on speed, is that the focus on the technical competencies of product managers is overweighted. And for me, product management has always been a business role or commercial role. You're there to create money, not to create just features. Can I ask, when you're engaging with clients and you're meeting product leaders, is this a theme that you're seeing, that they're highly technical, highly capable from identifying product strategies, but a weakness in that strategy thematically is how to monetize in the best possible way?
Yeah, I think when you ask about challenges that I see within some companies, they are in two camps. Sometimes product teams are, as you say, are just too technical. Sometimes too much in love with their products. Don't take this wrong, but looking at what can be built rather than what can be monetized. So that can be a challenge. That by now very often gets addressed through the C-suite, making sure that investments are channeled in the right way. The other challenge that I'm seeing, and that's an interesting one, people are not blind. They think about monetization. They think about business models and how to monetize. However, I see many teams, and that goes sometimes up to the CPO level, only stay at the surface. And that's dangerous. Let me give you an example. Very often I would hear things like, well, we want to move to a usage or outcome-based model. And then when we start asking questions and say, okay, what does it mean for you? What is usage? What are you going to count? And more importantly, is that part of your overall subscription? Are you going to charge customers extra on top of it? When we talk about AI now, an interesting question always becomes, okay, you're launching that agentic service. Can people use it as much as they want? What do you do about a customer going rogue and overusing it, which creates a lot of cost? Are you going to build in guardrails? There are a lot of deep questions behind those new business and monetization models. And often they are not thought through at the outset. So now you could say, well, that's always the start. You always start with a high level strategy. You bring it down and you make it more detailed. That's a normal process. However, when companies implement too quickly without having the right data and without having a solid strategy, what happens is that monetization models go wrong. And when that goes wrong, you have a customer satisfaction issue. And you never want to have that. And then you've got to retract and change your pricing models. That erodes trust. So that I think is one of the challenges that teams are facing, that they follow the high level trends, they do their education, they talk to some consultants, but they, in the absence of people available or time available, they sometimes don't put in the hard work to see how exactly would I like to do this. And I think that's an opportunity for companies to get ahead of the trend earlier and do a better job if they put that time in.
Okay, well, one of these trends that stands out to me right now is usage-based pricing. That is a trend, but from the conversations I'm having with product people is that it's a thing they're designing, they're implementing, but they're not necessarily considering the unit economics downstream of the effect of that, and then unwinding that is quite hard to do with the customer base. Nicole, for you today, what would be a best practice pricing, monetization architecture for monetizing particularly data, APIs, and AI that so many people are focused on right now?
Good point, and exactly the follow-on in the discussion before, of course, Jay. So we very often advise, and by the way, we are not pricing experts. What we do is we are doing licensing, entitlement management, right? We always defer to the experts when it goes to all deep data analysis, but we see a lot of good examples. Usage-based pricing has been and will always be like the cool thing to talk about. People have been talking about it for 10 years, and now it is actually getting more traction. However, there's also things to consider. For example, we talked about profitability. When you go pure usage-based, that comes with an extremely bumpy revenue stream, especially if it's postpaid and depending on what your customers are actually using. And when you talk to CFOs, when you talk to private equity held companies, they might not like that bumpiness, right? And then also when you think about the end customer, customers don't like the bumpiness. They have budgets to work with, right? So if they don't know if they're going to pay you $1 or $100 at the end of the month, that's a problem, especially if you're in a B2B field. And I would argue B2C as well, because we all have to manage our own budgets as well. So I think that what often works are hybrid models. And when I talk about a hybrid model, I mean, for example, something like most software today is monetized as a subscription, right? You could go ahead and say, okay, as part of your subscription, a certain amount of usage is included. If you're going to go over, then you would have to pay that extra. But also as a software vendor, then we do use a service of warning you when you run out of what's included, so that you're not running blind, right? So those models, I think, can be more successful. Other models that I'm seeing with some vendors that are even more conservative on that bumpiness of usage-based, they wouldn't do pure usage-based models, not even on top of a subscription. But what they do is they say, okay, a certain amount of usage is included. If you, for example, you have a good, better, best model, a certain amount of usage is included. If you continually go over that usage limit, we let you go over, but at some point, we will have a discussion with you as an end customer and come back and say, okay, you might need to step up to the next tier of the product to be more in line with your usage behavior. So there are ways to leverage usage or even outcomes when those can be counted without creating that risk for the product line P&L or even for the budgets of the customer. I think that's where we are going. As part of that too, then that goes deeper. But as part of that too, then you've got to look at too, what is your subscription based on? Subscription always gets used as this broad talk term. Oh yeah, we monetize as a subscription. But really, that's not the statement. The statement is what is your subscription based on? If your subscription is based on users, as for many software companies today, we are actually facing a quite interesting question, because you would argue that with AI and more automation, the number of actual human beings using the software might go down for many software vendors. So that's another thing to say. Subscription is a good term to use. Subscription only says it's term-based, right? It's a year, it's 3 years, it's a month, whatever. But then what is included in that subscription and how is it being counted is actually the way more interesting question. And I would argue that the pure user-based subscriptions that go by number of named users might be a model that we should be challenging, because that could change and might have a reverse effect for some software vendors.
Okay, well, I'm going to lean into that a little bit more around how we can use intelligence to work some of that out. But before we go there, in product, we can build and test in staging and sandboxes very safely on the feature side of product. But when it comes to pricing, what are the best ways to create intelligence before we get to the step of how to use it? How do you experiment with pricing in a safe way? Because for many CFOs, CROs, they're always going to be worried that we're leaving money on the table or we're scaring users off. So what are some of the practices to firstly create intelligence and create data to then consider adaptation for later on?
You're just saying it yourself, Jay. What is the first intelligence in creating data? The creating data is a big piece of it. So once you decide that you're going to potentially change your pricing and packaging model, and potentially use usage-based components, it is important to start counting before you start monetizing. And that is very often when companies make their plans about a pricing and packaging change, that counting and data creation phase isn't fully used, right? There's a phase to work with the consultants to sign off on a new monetization model to implement it. And then, of course, there's already the pressure to go live with it. What makes a lot of sense is to bring in tooling to count usage and to report on it way before you're going to make that change. At Revenera, for example, we offer one of our solutions is a tool that counts usage for token-based models, very often used for SaaS monetization, right? I buy a certain amount of credits or tokens upfront, I burn them down. We always recommend for customers to implement the tool and basically let it run in production without anyone knowing, to just provide the data, right? So when you say, okay, I want to, just making up a story now, right? I want to, usage for me is the completion of a certain transaction in the system, right? You should be counting how many of those transactions complete. And not only by a small set of customers, but across your customer base. because what also is interesting is that software is being used very, very differently by different customers. So if you think you have the right usage metric, you will often find out that you always have that curve, right? You have some customers not using that metric at all. You have some customers using it the way you expect it to, and you have some customers using it way beyond. And you have to think about how are you going to make the pricing work for all of your customers if you don't want to end up with customer-based pricing, which is a nightmare for 1,000 reasons. So I think the only way is to really also build in the technology to count and to build that into your production system, so you know how that usage looks like before you make the final call on implementing that model. I think there's no other way. Otherwise, you will go. And of course, we always change pricing and packaging, but we don't want to change it monthly. When we roll it out, we want to make sure that this works for now and say for the next year or two. The only way to get to that point is to implement technology before. So you get the data, you can model it out, and you can go back to the CFO and say, this is exactly what is going to happen based on real usage data. And then you implement it when you feel good about it.
Within the industries and customer segments that you see, Nicole, is there any particular industries or customer segments that are stuck in legacy mode when it comes to monetization here? Any themes?
Well, there is some industries are, but not to their own fault, but really just because of how software is being used. You still have some industries that rely a lot on high performance computing that is still being done on premise more than in the cloud. That's still a thing, believe it or not. So you think about electronic design and automation, for example, there's a lot of on-premise software still. You can also see that in any analyst report. That takes a little bit longer. You can implement any of those models for an on-premise software too. We do that with our customers on a daily basis. It's possible. It's a little bit harder than doing it for SaaS and fully cloud products. So that's that. And then we see other types of software. Very often when we talk about software, we think about all the cool SaaS tooling, right? But there's probably half of the software industry where software is running in conjunction with intelligent devices on a production floor, manufacturing, et cetera, et cetera. There's a ton of software running in those areas that often isn't seen or isn't talked about that often. That software, by definition, will always be on premise because it sits on a device or right next to a device that is sitting on a production line in a hospital or I don't know what. And then that software might not always be online. So, for example, you maybe you don't want your MRI scanner in the hospital to always be online for security reasons, right? But still, there is software running on it. That software, believe it or not, gets monetized. But then those models are a little bit more conservative just based on how that industry is working. I think that's normal. I think there's nothing wrong with it. That also means that some of the models that we have seen for many years will always be around, right? All these trends that we've talked about, all the innovation we discussed today, Jay, it never means that everyone will hop on that train straight away. Different trains go at a different pace or speed rather. And that's okay, right? In the end, it all depends on what is the value to the customer and how can the supplier run a business model that works for them. And if something works for them that doesn't include some of the new stuff, that's okay too, right? Based on the industry.
Yeah, I see this in my day role running an education technology company. We're selling into government, which have fixed budgets, buying essentially annual contracts. And although I think we could probably deliver more value under a usage-based pricing model for the industry, for the buyer, that's a foreign concept to them. They haven't done that over the last 50 years. So
Exactly.
You've got to meet, like anything in product, you've got to meet the customer with their expectations, and those big shifts will take a long while in those types of industries.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the usage intelligence to determine pricing. So particularly for those that are looking to transition a pricing or monetization model, how important is usage intelligence? And really, what do people often get wrong when looking at usage intelligence to determine pricing?
So my personal view is that if you run product and you don't run it based on data, you're at absolute risk. So to me, that's almost a non-negotiable. If you don't have usage intelligence, you don't know what your customers are doing, how can you run a good product strategy? So that's maybe a relatively short answer to your first question. The interesting part is, how do you do it? I don't want to get too technical here, but what I see happening very often is that product teams, when they need usage data, they need some insights, they would go to the engineering team and say, hey, can you build something into the software that shows me that data? And that can be a very risky journey to be on, because that means that the engineering teams that should actually build cool new software features and innovation end up building more and more telemetry in product reporting, usage counting, enforcement triggers if someone overuses, etc. That takes a lot of engineering time away. So I think product intelligence and usage data is always needed. There's tooling on the market to get that in a relatively simple way. Where I see product teams or generally companies struggle is if they have gone down too far the road of building everything themselves. Because it sounds like a small task in the beginning, but then when you get more sophisticated, there's always a need for more. There's always a need to change. And then they find themselves spending way too much engineering time on some of these concepts. It should be something that's in the hand of the product management team. I always highlight that anything that has to do with pricing, packaging, monetization should be configurable and manageable in the product team, and it shouldn't require you to go back to your engineering team all the time to get the data or to build something new and to even start capturing it. That can be a difficult path. We talked about profitability in the beginning. No one has an endless number of engineers. That doesn't happen. You only have a certain number of people that can build your product and make it stand out against your competition. You always need to decide, okay, should those people also be the ones to build usage intelligence, or can I get that through a tool that I just bring in to save my engineering team from an overhead in that area? And that sounds like a detail. I can tell you it's not. I can tell you that many companies spend way too much engineering time to try and do these things themselves.
Well, I want to stay in this space with you, Nicole, around internal culture, around monetization. When I think about collaboration for onboarding experiences, collaboration around roadmap design for the product company for a year ahead, they're often highly collaborative. But typically, when it comes to monetization collaboration, it feels like the thing that everyone wants to say, but no one quite often wants to truly own it. And for people who are in that type of business where the accountability is either unknown or blurry or grey, how do you bring together sales, product, and finance into alignment and make this conversation a conversation that everyone can enjoy? Because no one wants to get this wrong, because they're going to feel like they're the person that made the decision, they're the one that got it wrong. So how do you bring a team together to get excited, to lean in and feel like this is a safe conversation to re-evaluate a monetization strategy?
Yeah, good question. And you're absolutely right. It is a topic that everyone would like to have a say in, have an opinion in, but as you say, no one really wants to own it. And it's always a little bit of a scare, as in, okay, what if we do this and this goes wrong? And we are a vendor working with customers on this. It's sometimes we from the outside are the ones to bring the right people to the table, right? Because we sometimes see, okay, look, there's a siloed activity going on here. There's a product manager who has a really good idea, but he hasn't talked to his sales team. We realize that there's no buy-in from the CFO. What happens very often is not very often, but I've seen it happen. Product teams put a lot of work in, and then the CFO comes in at the last minute and says, no way, it's not working. We had that example with usage. What if the CFO or the board of a company is not bought in to doing a usage-based model? You find that out late, then you will have wasted a lot of work time. So two things are important from my perspective. A, as you say, it is a team. Someone needs to have the authority and the focus to bring a team together that's cross-functional, that works on a monetization strategy. Usually that would include product management, it would include the operations team, it would include sales, and it will also include the channels or partners or alliances team, whatever they are called, because there's usually a different mechanism as it comes to monetization for the channel. And then the other thing is that I always advise customers to get executive buy-in early. You don't necessarily need the CPO or the CFO to be part of a monetization project, but in the end, they are the ones to make sure it gets approved and actually done. If there's no executive sponsorship on those products, they have a high risk of creating a lot of work and then sitting on the graveyard of things that never get done. So build a good team, brings the right people together, always make sure that sales and channel are part of the discussion. And then let's make sure that there is executive sponsorship.
If we do a great job of all of that, as we lean into 2026 around the corner, what advice do you have for software companies on innovation strategies and business models going into next year?
Well, I think we've touched on some of them already, but let me summarize them. I think as I think about new monetization models and new capabilities that they want to monetize on top of what they have today, they should go and try that out. And try that out as two components. Talk to customers and find out if there is real value. I think it's good to go to a customer and ask them a direct question and say, hey, we launched this cool new AI feature. Please tell me if he asked you, what you pay for it. And if the customer says, you know what, it's a sweet feature, but I don't see us paying for it, it really doesn't have a lot of value, then take that feedback on board. And then the other is the technical part of it. Track the data, get the usage intelligence, and to understand how software is being used. And then the third, get ahead on the product line P&L and understand where the profitability is. Sometimes the profitability is still sitting with on-premise products. That's okay, but then you also need to think about how do I grab that customer cohort and move them to my cloud and SaaS products, if that is the strategy that I'm on. If I don't understand what those customers are doing, I also have big risks. So those are the things that the software companies should be doing. I think we'll see a lot of consolidation in how AI is being used, what actually gets monetized. The last word here is not spoken. I think we are on an interesting track here. We see new monetization models coming out on a daily basis. But I think there will still be some right sizing, some consolidation. So it's always also good to look at what is the competition doing, what's working in the industry. And my strong philosophy is always, if it doesn't work for your customers, right, find that out early and adjust, because no one can work. The customers always have the last word in this, as they should.
Nice. Nicole, I want to finish on a more personal note for the audience. When researching you, I know horseback riding is something that's a significant part of your personal development. Can I ask, through your career, what role has mentorship and personal development in things like horseback riding played in leadership progress for you as an individual?
It's funny that we found out that I did horseback riding. Anyways, we can talk about that later. It plays a big role for me. So when I think about career growth and how I keep myself sane, I do that by always finding a balance between sitting here at my desk and doing the work that I'm doing and getting out and resetting my brain, my mind around the things that I'm working on. I have found that I had the best thinking and strategizing, not when I'm sitting in front of my computer, but when I'm sitting on a horse or on a bicycle, because it clears up my brain and I can get to really more strategic thinking outside of the day-to-day. So it's helped me a lot. It also helped me stay as even keeled as possible. And I am often a leader to remind my people that it's not necessary to sit in front of the computer all the time. It is necessary to be productive. And to think things through, and people have different ways of getting to that point. To me, it's often connected to actually being outdoors and doing some things that clears my mind.
Fantastic. Well, the inner child in me has to ask this next question then. Nicole, if you could only ride a horse or a bike for the rest of your life, which one would you choose?
It would probably be the bike. Having a horse is a lot of responsibility. It's a lot of money, and I don't want to be tied down in my life. So I think I'd use the bike because I can park it in the shed if I don't want to use it for 2 weeks, and it won't have a problem with it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much today for today, Nicole. It's really been an enjoyable, insightful conversation around monetization, not only where we've been, where we're at, and where we're going. And I truly appreciate getting the opportunity to speak to someone like you that has lived and breathed this for well over a decade as a specialist domain subject. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks a lot for inviting me, Jay. It was a great conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope it's the same for everyone who joined us here. Thanks a lot for having me here.
Thank you. And thank you to the audience for listening in. If you'd like to learn more about Product Coalition, please head over to productcoalition.com. Until next episode, thank you very much.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Product Coalition podcast, hosted by Jay Stansel. Got questions or want to explore more topics? Connect with Jay on LinkedIn or join the ever-growing Product Coalition community on Substack. Thanks for listening.